In the winter-choked ruins of Metz, France, the city felt like a place the world had already abandoned. Smoke rose from shattered rooftops like dying breaths, chimneys broken in half, windows blasted into jagged mouths. Snow and ash mixed on the streets until it was impossible to know which belonged to nature and which belonged to war. By 1944, Metz had become a graveyard for infantrymen and an invisible nightmare for American snipers. The Germans had turned it into a maze of kill zones. And every alley carried the memory of someone who never made it back. The Americans who approached the city heard the stories even before they reached the outer blocks. 23 snipers lost. Not wounded, lost. Each one killed by an enemy they never saw. Each one pulled into the fight with confidence, only to vanish under the gaze of a German trained to read dust, sound, breath, or hesitation. The German sniper units in Metz were not ordinary marksmen. Many were veterans of the Eastern Front, men who had survived the terrifying duel with Soviet sharpshooters and brought that lethal discipline westward. They chose their nests with mathematical precision, chose their moments like predators. And they fought with one belief: the battlefield belonged to those who could see first. PFC Michael Donovan entered this battlefield with a rifle that felt colder than the air. He was 21, the kind of soldier who neither looked nor acted like someone important. He carried himself quietly, without the swagger many snipers displayed. He wasn't interested in glory or tall tailies. Donovan had joined the sniper section because he was a natural shot, a calm thinker, and someone who read the world in details. But in Metz, none of that seemed to matter. Skill didn't matter. Nerves didn't matter. Even experience didn't matter. The moment a sniper raised his scope, a crack echoed, and another body went still. The rumor spreading through the American lines said the German snipers had developed an unbeatable technique. Nobody knew exactly what it was, only that it worked, and it was killing them faster than command could replace them. Donovan listened, absorbing every whispered speculation, every hushed theory. Some men insisted the Germans had spotters hidden in the sewers. Others said they could hear scopes brushing fabric. Others said they watched reflections off eyeballs. The stories grew with every death, turning the enemy into mythic creatures who saw through walls and killed without ever revealing themselves. Donovan refused to believe in invincibility. If a man could do something, another man could undo it. The sniper section reorganized after each loss, morale thinning like the ranks themselves. Barnes, the section sergeant, paced constantly, chewing gum hard enough to crack molars. He tried rotating positions, limiting exposure, even ordering men to keep their scopes covered until the last possible second. None of it mattered. If a sniper raised his weapon, the Germans found him. Donovan watched it happen. Carroll, the one who used to hum jazz tunes under his breath, took a position behind a collapsed stone wall, barely lifted his scope an inch above cover. And the shot found him before his breath even fogged. The American officers debated pulling snipers out entirely. Donovan knew what that meant. Without counter-sniper support, infantry patrols would be massacred in the open streets. Metz would grind them down like a millstone. Something had to change. 2 days into the siege, Donovan made an observation, not heroic, not dramatic, just a simple detail. It happened during a moment most soldiers would overlook. He watched the sun glint briefly off a piece of broken glass lying in the rubble. The flash was tiny, but enough to catch attention. Enough to be seen from a distance. Enough to mimic the betrayal that gave snipers away when their scopes reflected the light. The idea arrived half-formed, like a fragment of intuition that didn't yet understand itself. Later, sitting near the scorched remains of an overturned truck, Donovan found an old shaving mirror in a medic's discarded kit. The glass was cracked but mostly intact. He turned it over in his hand, watched the sunlight catch its edges, studied the angles, imagined the possibilities. A mirror didn't need to be big. It only needed to be reflective enough. He held it against a rock, tilting it until he could see around the truck's remains without exposing his head. The realization struck him harder than the cold wind. He could see without being seen. No sniper manual mentioned using a mirror. No training sergeant had ever suggested it. The idea sounded almost childish, an improvised trick out of a boyhood imagination. He doubted any officer would approve, but that didn't matter. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was trying not to die. That night, he found a roll of black tape and secured the mirror to a wooden stick he tore from a crate. It was crude, laughably so. A child could have assembled it. But when he crouched behind a collapsed stone balcony and lifted the mirror just an inch above the rubble, he could see the street ahead as if he were hovering above it. The angles were distorted, but usable. Most importantly, he was hidden. The next morning, before dawn, the sniper section gathered for another attempt to push deeper into the ruins. Barnes looked exhausted, shadows under his eyes, voice raw. Donovan approached him and explained his idea. Barnes stared at the contraption, blinked twice, then shook his head. "That's stupid," he muttered. "That's not regulation." "I'm not looking for regulation, Sarge," Donovan replied softly. "Just survival." Barnes hesitated. They had already buried too many. Finally he sighed and waved the kid forward. "Fine, but if that thing gets you killed, I'm writing in the report that I said no." Donovan smiled faintly. "Fair enough." The patrol moved through an abandoned street where snow formed uneven mounds over debris. The silence felt wrong, too perfect, the kind that meant a sniper was watching from someplace. He had absolute confidence. Donovan gripped his rifle but didn't raise it. Instead, he slowly lifted his improvised mirror above the rubble. The men froze, watching him. It looked ridiculous. A stick with a tiny mirror, wobbling slightly in the wind. But Donovan didn't care what it looked like. He cared about the truth it revealed. In the reflection, he saw the faintest flicker of motion, just a shift in shadow from a distant second-story window. To the naked eye, the window appeared empty, dark, harmless. But from the angled reflection, the slightest glint betrayed a lens catching stray light. Donovan steadied the mirror. The angle told him what he needed. He didn't aim blindly. He didn't guess. He simply lowered the mirror, lifted his rifle from behind perfect cover, and fired one controlled shot without ever showing his silhouette. The German rifle clattered from the window. The patrol didn't cheer. They simply stared, stunned, the silence thick enough to feel. Someone whispered, "Holy hell." For the first time in Metz, they had struck first. News spread fast. Donovan's stupid mirror stick, as Barnes called it, became a curiosity, then a request, then a necessity. Another sniper asked him to make one. Then another. Soon Donovan spent nights taping mirrors and sticks together, building improvised tools for men who wanted any chance to reach the next morning alive. The Germans noticed the change. Instead of predictable targets, they found ghosts, American snipers who no longer peeked from cover, no longer revealed their scopes, no longer exposed themselves to the trap the Germans had perfected. The hunters lost their monopoly on sight. Donovan's kills rose quickly, but he didn't take pride in the number. He didn't count bodies. He counted the men who came back each day. The ones who didn't get ambushed. The ones who started believing survival was possible again. For the German side, frustration grew. A sniper who believed he was undiscoverable was suddenly dead before he heard the bullet. Their advantage cracked. Their rhythm broke. They searched for explanations, but none made sense. They never suspected a 10-cent shaving mirror. One evening, after a long day of repositioning and clearing houses, Barnes approached Donovan with an expression halfway between admiration and disbelief. "You realize you just changed sniper doctrine without asking anyone's permission?" He muttered. Donovan shrugged. "I just didn't want to die." Barnes chuckled. "Kid, you might be the only reason half this unit is still breathing." But Donovan didn't think of himself as a hero. Not even close. He spent his nights repairing cracked mirrors, adjusting angles, studying reflections, refining what he had started. The mirror was only part of the trick. The real advantage came from learning how reflections bent reality. He discovered that a tiny tilt could reveal sightlines invisible to the naked eye. He learned to read distortions, to decode shapes, to see sniper hides the enemy believed. Impossible to spot. The men who fought beside him started calling him the Ghost Maker. But the Germans responded. And what they did next would push Donovan into a duel that would become legend among the few who survived to tell it. The Germans adapted faster than anyone expected. Their officers were veterans of long, bitter sniper wars, and when their men began dying in nests previously considered untouchable, they knew something unconventional was happening. They couldn't explain it yet, but they could sense it. Their instincts sharpened, their caution doubled, and in response, they deployed one of their best, a sniper known only as the Watcher. No one knew his real name. The Americans only knew he was responsible for nearly half of the kills inflicted on their section. His shots were perfect, his concealment flawless, his patterns unpredictable. He killed without leaving a trace, and he disappeared before scouts could even reach his perch. He favored the highest windows, the narrowest gaps, the most improbable firing lines. He wasn't just trained, he was gifted. The Watcher arrived in Donovan's sector after 3 days of American success, and the shift in danger was immediate. One by one, the mirror-equipped snipers began returning with reports of angles that felt wrong, reflections that revealed nothing, and shots that came from places no sane sniper would choose. Donovan realized what was happening. The Watcher wasn't just hunting. He was studying them. He had sensed a new tactic and wanted to decipher it. On the 4th day, he came close. 2 snipers using Donovan's mirrors were killed within 10 minutes of each other. Both deaths occurred during mirror sweeps, which suggested the German finally understood the Americans weren't peeking normally. He was shooting at reflections. This changed everything. Donovan gathered the section and explained what they faced. The men listened with grim faces, their confidence shaken. The mirrors had saved lives, but the enemy now knew their secret. The battlefield had evolved again, and they were back at the edge of danger. That night, Donovan lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling of the half-destroyed room he slept in. He replayed the Watcher's kills in his mind. The timing, the precision, the angles. The German wasn't firing at the mirrors blindly, he was predicting where the mirrors must be based on geometry. The enemy had turned Donovan's trick against him. Most men would have abandoned the technique. Donovan refused. The Germans weren't omniscient. They were solving patterns. And patterns could be broken. He spent 2 hours experimenting, tilting the mirror at different heights, adjusting its position relative to cover, testing whether a reflection could be made to appear offset. He discovered that by angling the mirror downward and placing it slightly behind an object instead of above it, he could create a deceptive reflection, one that suggested he was positioned 2 feet to the left of where he truly sat. It was risky. It was fragile. But it was enough. The next morning, he went hunting for the Watcher. The ruins were silent except for the distant thump of artillery and the hiss of cold wind slipping through broken walls. Donovan moved slowly, using every shadow as shelter, every hole in the stone as a vantage point. His breath fogged faintly in front of him, so he exhaled down his collar to minimize the plume. In sniper duels, even breath could betray you. He set up behind a collapsed staircase, its concrete slabs forming a natural bunker. He positioned his mirror behind a shard of metal, creating the deceptive angle he'd tested. When he lifted it, the street appeared warped, but readable. He scanned each window, each hole punched through brick, each darkened balcony. Asterisk there. A flicker. Not light movement. A faint shift in color in a narrow gap of a third-story structure that looked too abandoned for use. Donovan didn't react. Not externally. Inside, adrenaline tightened everything. He lowered the mirror and waited. 2 minutes passed. Then 3. Then a shot. It struck the metal shard precisely where a mirror would be. If Donovan had used the standard method, the watcher had taken the bait. The shot told Donovan everything he needed. He now knew the German's exact window. And more importantly, the German believed Donovan was positioned 2 feet to the left. Behind the false angle created by the reflection, the duel had entered its final phase. Donovan slid his rifle into position, moving slow enough that not even dust shifted. He didn't rise above cover. He didn't expose his scope. He simply aimed through a slot in the collapsed concrete, a gap so small the watcher would never anticipate anyone using it. He steadied his breathing, counted the seconds, imagined where the German must be settling back after firing. The shot Donovan fired traveled silently through the cold morning. The German rifle dropped from the window. A shape slumped forward behind the frame, then disappeared. The watcher of Metz was gone. For a moment Donovan didn't move. He listened, waited, measured the silence. Snipers always knew when a duel was truly over. He felt the shift, the invisible release, the loosening tension. A hunter had fallen. When he finally rose from cover, the world looked different. The city wasn't safer, not yet, but one of its shadows had been extinguished. The American sniper section felt the change immediately. The constant fear that had stalked them lifted, even if only slightly. Information spread like a quiet ripple through the ranks. Donovan had beaten the German ghost. He had done it with a mirror that cost less than a chocolate bar, and a calculation that no manual had ever taught. In the following days, the mirror technique evolved further. Donovan taught the others how to use distortions to mislead the enemy, how to avoid predictable positioning, how to create reflective decoys. Snipers began returning from missions with fewer casualties. Patrols moved with greater confidence. Infantry trusted the overwatch again. By the end of the Metz operation, Donovan's method had contributed to saving more than 60 lives, men who would have walked into the crosshairs of an unseen rifleman and never walked out. But the military world is complicated. When higher command learned what the snipers were using, the reaction wasn't applause. Officers debated the legitimacy of improvised techniques. Some argued it wasn't standard. Others claimed mirrors could create new vulnerabilities. A few simply didn't want unofficial modifications becoming widespread. With the war pushing forward rapidly, the conversation was buried under layers of bureaucracy. Reports about the mirror technique never made it into official doctrine. Donovan's contribution slipped quietly into the forgotten corners of military history. He didn't seek recognition. He didn't chase medals. To him, the mirror was nothing more than a tool for survival. An idea born from desperation in a city where the price of mistakes was measured in lives. Years later, veterans who served beside him would still talk about Metz, not the grand strategy or the armored divisions or the sweeping movements of armies. They talked about the kid with the mirror, the quiet sniper who refused to accept that an enemy could be invincible, the soldier who trusted reflection over luck, who saw angles where others saw death, who used a single piece of glass to rewrite the rules of engagement. They remembered how the Germans lost their advantage, how American snipers finally walked out of Metz not as hunted men, but as survivors. They remembered how something so small, so absurd-looking, became the turning point. War often glorifies the large, the loud, the powerful. But sometimes history bends not because of mighty weapons or famous generals, but because one soldier dared to think differently in the ruins of a dying city. The mirror trick vanished from manuals, forgotten by official history. But among the men who lived through Metz, it never disappeared. It became a quiet legend, passed in whispers, told at reunions, shared in memories that blurred with time but never faded entirely. Michael Donovan never considered himself extraordinary. But the battlefield has a way of revealing truths that soldiers rarely admit about themselves. In Metz, he saw the one thing everyone else missed, that in a war shaped by bullets, sometimes the deadliest weapon of all is perspective, and with a 10-cent mirror. He changed the war not by force, but by seeing what others overlooked. His legacy lived not in medals or monuments, but in the lives of the men who returned home, because he was there alive, thinking, and refusing to give the enemy a clean shot. A forgotten genius in a forgotten corner of France, whose improvised idea saved dozens, terrified the best snipers the Germans could field, and proved that sometimes the smallest ideas shine brightest in the darkest places.